HannahMouse1 here. Welcome to a comprehensive beginner's Scratch tutorial. In this video, I will teach you how to make an infinite, vertically scrolling platformer like Doodle Jump or Google's game Whirlybird. The first thing that you need to know is this. This is a scripting tutorial, so I don't want to spend too much time about costumes. If you do not wish to make them yourself, I'll link an empty version of the project down below. It will have all of the sprites and costumes, but none of the code. If this is you, skip to the timestamp on the screen to get to the actual coding part. However, if you want to make these yourself, this is what you'll need. One sprite, which is the player controller. The only costume for this one is the hitbox, so a small square. One basic platform. I used a grass top slab of dirt, but you can do whatever you want to fit your game's theme. One bouncy platform. I made it a pink jelly colour, but again, do what you like. You'll also need one cracked platform. You need a sprite with all your player costumes. These should be larger than your hitbox costume on the player controller, with the character's feet being roughly at the bottom of the hitbox. You need a moving up state and a moving down state for each direction, left, right, and straight on. They should be named as I have here, as this makes it easier to switch between the costumes later on. Then you need a game over screen, and finally a sprite which consists of all the numbers 0 to 9. I know that's a lot, so if you need to pause and make them, do so now. Other than that though, let's jump in. So, now that's sorted, we can move on to the actual coding. Go to your player controller sprite. The first thing I like to do with all my projects is have the green flag broadcast message 1, and then have all the game code come from message 1 rather than when green flag clicked. This probably doesn't matter for a simple game like this one, but it does help make sure that all the sprites get the first message exactly when you want them to. Also, if you retroactively want to add something before the game, like a start menu, it makes that so much easier. It's just good practice, so let's do that. The first thing that we're going to do is to make a basic platforming engine. I know, sounds scary, but I'm going to make it nice and simple for you. We need to make a custom block, call it movement. Make sure that run without screen refresh is selected. This means that the entire script will run in a single frame. Typically on Scratch, a repeat loop executes one cycle per frame, which is great for creating a smooth animation, but not what we need here. We need the loops to execute every cycle all at once. We need to constantly execute this block. So, when we receive message 1, forever, movement. Of course, we haven't defined the movement script yet, so this won't do anything. Now, we need a variable that I'm going to call yvel, short for y velocity. Let's have that set to 0 at the broadcast of message 1. We should also set the player start location. I'll use 0, 145. Let's now add a block to our movement script. Change y by the y velocity. Because yvel is 0, this still won't do anything. Let's rectify that. Right-click the movement block and click Edit. First, change the block name so that it's now called Movement Gravity : and then press this first button to add in a number or text input. Call this Gravity. Add in a block to the first line of movement. Change yvel by, and then drag Gravity into the value space as so. In the forever loop, you can now set the gravity to whatever you want. It should be a small negative number. The bigger the number, the heavier your character will feel. So for this game, I want to feel very light and bouncy. So let's use -1. As you can see, the character falls and accelerates as they do. Perfect. But right now, if there's a platform underneath the player, they fall straight through it. Let's fix that, shall we? Let's add an if statement to the end of our movement block and use the sensing block touching, then our basic platform. Then put in a repeat until loop, then the operator not, and then touching basic platform. Then do change y by 1 inside this loop. This moves the player up 1 pixel until it is on top of the platform. Then set y velocity to 0. If you find that you're falling through the platform, make sure that your hitbox is big enough. If it's too small, there's a chance that your character could pass straight through the platform without ever coming into collision. Now, the player lands on the platform and stops. For some games, this is perfect, but we want the player to be constantly jumping. Luckily, this is a really easy fix. Just have the y velocity set to 15 instead of 0. Perfect. Now, let's add in some horizontal movement. We need to edit the movement block again. Add a label, speed, and then the input, speed. Then add a label, x speed, and then the input, x speed. Let's set speed to 7. The higher this is, the faster you'll move. For X speed, we first need a subtraction operator. Then take the key pressed sensor. For the controls, I personally like W, A, S and D. So I'm going to use key D for right and key A for left. But you can switch this up if you prefer. These sensors are what is known as a Boolean data type, meaning it is either true or false. However, these also have numerical values, which is very useful. If the statement is true, the value is 1, and if it is false, it is 0. So, if we do key D pressed, take away key A pressed, then this has the value 1 when key D is pressed, -1 if A is pressed, and 0 if both or neither are pressed. This is our X speed. Now, in our movement block, we can do change X by speed multiplied by X speed, and voila. So now we should actually create the platforms to jump up. So click onto the basic platform and make a custom block setup with run without screen refresh selected. Have the sprite hide and go to -180, -30. Now repeat 7, create clone of myself, and then change X by 60. Note, if you're using different size platforms to me, you might need to change these values slightly. Don't be afraid to play around with it. Don't worry, you won't break anything. Have this happen when we receive message 1. Now, take a when I start as clone block and simply have the block show. There, we now have a row of platforms across the screen. Now we need platforms to actually climb up. So, under setup, add a repeat until loop. Then, put in a greater than operator. What we need is repeat until Y position is greater than 160. Now, set X to pick random -200 to 200 and change Y by, let's say, 25 to 50. The smaller these numbers are, the more platforms there will be. Then create clone of myself. You might quickly notice that there's something a bit off about the player's physics. See how the platforms almost propel the player upwards? Yeah, it's not great. What we really need is for the platforms to only act solid when the player is falling, allowing the player to jump through them. That's easy enough. Back on the player controller's movement block, let's quickly take out this touching basic block. Let's put in an AND operator and replace the touching basic block into the first condition space. For the second, put in a less than block. We need yvel to be less than 0. That's better. We also need the camera to scroll upwards. For this, we need a new variable. Let's call it ypos, short for Y position, and set this to 0 when message 1 is received. Now, at the end of the movement script, change ypos by Y position, and then set Y to 0. The player is now anchored vertically to the center of the screen, but you can still move left and right. Now we need the platforms to scroll to. Go to the basic platform. We need a new variable. Select for this sprite only, which allows each clone to hold its own value for this. Call it this ypos. Under when I start as clone, set this ypos to Y position plus ypos. Now, forever, set Y to this ypos minus ypos. And now it scrolls. Okay, so in the forever loop, add an if-else block. If Y position is less than 179, show. Else, hide. This stops the platform just existing at the top of the screen, as Scratch does not allow sprites to go fully off the screen. Then add an if function. If Y is less than -179, delete this clone. The clones now disappear when we go past them. We need to be able to generate new platforms. Let's go back to the player controller. Okay, so we need a new variable next. Set this to pick random 160 to 170. Add an if function to the movement function. If ypos is greater than next, set next to ypos plus pick random 25 to 40, and then create clone of basic. Under basic, add a forever loop to the message 1 script. In this loop, go to pick random -200 to 200, 175. You should now see a generation of an infinite amount of platforms. Fantastic. Our game is now actually playable, but it's still a bit boring, no? Let's add some different platforms into this. Bounce pads are the easiest thing to add in. First, they need a lot of the same code as the basic pads, so let's copy that across. The when I start as clone 1 can go across exactly as it is. For the when I receive message 1 script, let's quickly copy it, remove the setup block, and then drag the rest over. Now let's delete the copy as so. Go to the bounce sprite and add in a hide block when message 1 is received. Back on the character controller, copy this section of the movement script, which checks for collisions with the basic platforms. Put this duplication into the script and change both of the touching blocks to be touching bouncy. Then increase what yval is set to from 15 to 30. Now we need to have these bounce pads spawn instead of regular platforms from time to time. Scroll down to the part of the character controller that creates clone of basic. Drag this into the else function of an if-else block and then place this function back into the script. For the if part of this, take an equals operator and put if pick random 1 to 7 equals 1, create clone of bouncy. Now there is a 1 in 7 chance that any given platform is a bounce pad. Let's test this. You might notice that the bouncy clones aren't deleting. This is because my bouncy sprite is smaller than the basic one, so it can't actually reach Y position minus 180 to delete. Let's increase this to minus 175. That's better. Let's add in some cracked platforms. These will allow the player to jump on them once and then disappear. First, go to the bouncy sprite and drag all the scripts into the cracked sprite. For the cracked sprite, we can't have the effect occur in the movement script as the platform must also be affected. So let's do this within the platform itself. Place an if statement at the end of the forever loop. Add an and operator. The first condition is if touching player controller. The second is yval is less than 0. In here, set yval to 15 and delete this clone. Back to the character controller. Duplicate the if statement that creates the clones. Take the clone basic from the original and then put the new statement in its place. Change this clone here to create clone of cracked and let's make them a bit more common. Let's say 1 in 4. There, all the platforms are working. Now, there's one thing that this style of game often does, where if the player goes off the side of the screen, they re-enter from the other side. Let's add this in. So, on the movement script, under the change x by block, add in 2 if statements. In the top one, put an and operator. Put a greater than operator into each of the conditions. The first one should be x speed greater than 0. The second will be x position is greater than 237. In this function, set x to minus 237. The second if statement is very similar, but this time it's if x speed is less than 0 and x position is less than minus 237. This should set x to positive 237. We can now loop through the screen. Now let's add the score. Go to the player controller. First, make a variable, score, and set that to 0 when message 1 received. Add an if statement to the end of the movement script. If ypos is greater than score, set score to ypos. Now we can sort out a fail state. We need a new variable for this, state. When we receive message 1, the state should be alive. Let's add an if statement to movement. Put in a greater than operator and then put a subtraction in the left hand side. Score minus ypos is greater than 340. In the function, set state to dead. Now put all but these first 2 lines into the first bracket of an if-else loop. We need this to only run if state is alive. Else, if y position is less than minus 165, broadcast new message end. When the player controller receives end, we should stop all other scripts in this sprite. Let's go to our game over screen sprite. When I receive message 1, hide. Simple. Now, when I receive end, show. We also need a go to back layer block because the score will display over this. I want this to fade in, so let's set ghost effect to 100. Then repeat 10 times. Change ghost by minus 10. Now, when we fall, the end screen appears. Let's get the score to appear here, shall we? Go to the score sprite. When I receive message 1, go to where the first number should be. For me, that's minus 84.25 and hide. Now, create custom block clone with run without screen refresh selected. Create a variable for this sprite only called thisVal. In the clone script, set thisVal to 0 and put in a repeat loop. This loop should repeat length of score. Change thisVal by 1, create clone of myself, and change x by the width of your widest number. For me, that's about 12. Have this run when we receive end. When I start as clone, show. Switch costume to letter thisVal of score. It's important that your costumes are named as the number of the sprite it depicts. So the costume with the number 1 is called 1. Now let's have this fade in by again setting ghost effect to 100 and then repeat 10 times. Change ghost effect by minus 10. Now let's sort out this ugly square. Go to your costume sprite. When I receive message 1, show and go to front layer. Add a forever loop and in this put go to player controller. Okay, so easy as that, we have a player, but it still needs a lot of polish. Let's go back to our player controller. First, at the top of the movement script, set ghost effect to 100. This hides the sprite whilst keeping the collisions. We need a new variable, direction. Now, let's add an if-else statement to our movement script, just after the section on horizontal movement. If x speed is equal to 0, set direction to center. Add another if-else into the else bracket. If x speed is greater than 0, set direction to right. Else, set the direction to left. Make sure that each has a capital letter. Now, go back to the costume sprite. Add an if-else statement to the forever loop. If yval is greater than 0, switch costume to. Drag in the join operator, direction, and up. Else, switch costume to join direction and down. Test this out. If it doesn't work, check your spelling and capital letters, both in where you set the variables and in the costume names in the costume sprite. Let's also add a when I receive end block and have the costume hide. Got all this working? Great. If you haven't done so already, hide all the variables. Now, I want to add in some really basic sound effects. It's shocking how much of a difference these make. I use sounds from the extensive Scratch sound library. In the movement script, under the collision with the bounce pad, I add a boing sound. Then, under the collision with the basic platform, I add a smaller boing sound like the basketball bounce sound. But hearing this over and over would drive me mad. So I like to do what's called pitch shifting. Before the basketball sound, add in a set pitch block. Set it to random 0 to 20. And because I don't want to change the pitch on the boing sound, add a set pitch to 0 block before that. One more sound effect on the cracked platform. This should be some sort of crunch sound. Have a listen. Oh great, that's so much more satisfying. And that's all I have to teach you today. However, I do have a challenge for you. Add at least one thing to your build that I haven't included in mine. This could be an enemy you have to avoid, moving platforms, ghost platforms that you can't actually jump on, a jetpack that provides constant upwards momentum, some form of collectible, whatever you want. There's so much you could do with this, and I believe in you. Post the link to your project in the comments down below. I'd love to play them. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. It lets me know that this is something you want to see more of, and apart from that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Sunday with another video. Bye!